Under the bright, unforgiving lights of Madison Square Garden, a storm of history, pride, and expectation converged. The crowd swelled with a roar that felt alive, thousands of voices crashing together as two icons prepared to step onto boxing's most sacred stage. This wasn't a fight built on youth or the promises of tomorrow. This was a meeting of legacies, a collision of eras, a battle between two men who had carved their names so deeply into the sport that even time struggled to erase their shine. On one side stood Roy Jones Jr., the former light heavyweight king, the former heavyweight champion of the world, a man whose prime had been so extraordinary, so untouchable, that highlight reels seemed too small a canvas to contain him. He walked toward the ring with the calm of a veteran who had seen every shade of combat, the crowd chanting, "Roy," as if calling back the ghost of the invincible fighter he once was. And across from him, the undefeated Welsh master, Joe Calzaghe, the reigning, defending, unbeaten light heavyweight champion of the world, a man known for his relentless pace, his storm-like flurries, and a fighting spirit hardened in 1,000 gym wars. Calzaghe entered to a thunderous ovation, his confidence glowing, his steps controlled, his eyes locked on Roy with a mixture of respect and fire. This wasn't just a fight. It was a test of greatness across generations. The referee brought them together, two legends inches apart, reminding them of the rules, commanding them to protect themselves at all times. Gloves touched, the bell chimed, and the garden held its breath as the first echoes of history began to form, waiting for the story that would unfold when a master of rhythm met a master of reflexes in the center of the ring. The first round began with electric tension, both fighters circling, searching, trying to decode the rhythm of the other. Calzaghe moved with his trademark bounce, feints twitching from his shoulders, while Roy stood tall, poised, waiting to unleash that legendary speed that once seemed gifted from another world. And then, suddenly, it came. A sharp, perfectly timed counter right hand from Roy Jones Jr. exploded onto Calzaghe's chin, snapping his head sideways and dropping the undefeated champion to the canvas. The crowd erupted, an explosion of disbelief and awe. It echoed back to the old days, the days when Roy ruled boxing with impossible angles and supernatural timing. Calzaghe rose, more shocked than broken, but blood already trickled from his nose as he wiped it calmly, nodding as if reminding himself he had been here before, just as he had against Hopkins months earlier. But Jones wasn't done. Not yet. He pressed forward with confidence, landing another right hand, reminding the world that even at 39, the brilliance hadn't fully dimmed. But Calzaghe, stubborn and resilient, refused to yield. Instead of running, instead of trying to stall out the round, he chose to fight his way back, diving into exchanges, hammering the body, trying to drown Roy in volume. As the round closed, Jones stood tall, proud, energized by the knockdown. Calzaghe walked back to his corner, knowing he had a mountain to climb, but smiling faintly, as though adversity was exactly what he needed to ignite the fire. The fight was no longer about patience or pacing. It had become a war of wills, and as the second round loomed, the question hung heavy in the air. Could Roy summon the ghosts of his prime, or would Calzaghe's relentless engine begin its inevitable takeover? The second and third rounds opened with a dramatic shift in momentum. Where Roy had once dictated pace with counterpunches and veteran craft, Calzaghe now began to assert his will. But Calzaghe, stubborn and resilient, refused to yield. Instead of running, instead of trying to stall out the round, he chose to fight his way back, diving into exchanges, hammering the body, trying to drown Roy in volume. As the round closed, Jones stood tall, proud, energized by the knockdown. Calzaghe walked back to his corner, knowing he had a mountain to climb, but smiling faintly, as though adversity was exactly what he needed to ignite the fire. The fight was no longer about patience or pacing. It had become a war of wills, and as the second round loomed, the question hung heavy in the air. Could Roy summon the ghosts of his prime, or would Calzaghe's relentless engine begin its inevitable takeover? The second and third rounds opened with a dramatic shift in momentum. Where Roy had once dictated pace with counterpunches and veteran craft, Calzaghe now began to assert his will. His punches weren't thrown with knockout power. No, they were thrown with purpose, with persistence, with a rhythm that forced Roy to react, defend, and rethink. Calzaghe's hands blurred, whipping together combinations that slapped, stung, and disrupted Roy's timing. A swarm of jabs, flicks, hooks, and body shots poured forward, not to devastate, but to overwhelm. Roy answered with sharp single shots, clean right hands that snapped Calzaghe's head, but each one seemed to matter less as Joe's output grew. The champion began showboating, dropping his hands, slipping Roy's counters, beckoning him forward. It was psychological warfare, Calzaghe reminding Roy that he was no longer the fighter who once made the impossible look routine. Blood streamed from Calzaghe's nose, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he pressed harder, pushing Roy to the ropes, forcing him to shell up under the blizzard of punches. The crowd roared with every exchange, the garden turning into a cauldron of chants and gasps. By round 4, the fight had taken on a new identity. Roy was still dangerous, always dangerous, but Calzaghe was now fighting his fight. High pace, high confidence, high pressure. The Welshman's combinations began to carve openings in Roy's defense. In these rounds, Joe landed far more punches, 20 of 58 in one stretch, backing Roy up, forcing him to throw less and think more. Yet Roy remained defiant, landing counters, uppercuts, and occasional rights that reminded everyone he still possessed the spirit of a champion. But the tide had shifted. For Calzaghe, each passing minute was a climb out of the knockdown. For Roy, it was a struggle against time, memory, and the fading echoes of his prime. The battle was far from over, but its shape had changed, and the Welshman was now the storm. The later rounds brought the kind of brutal, soul-testing drama that only legendary fighters can produce. Calzaghe's pressure intensified, his legs bouncing, his hands working like pistons as he drove Roy back, round after round. And then came the moment that could have broken lesser fighters. A massive uppercut from Calzaghe sliced open Roy's left eye. Blood streamed instantly, thick, red, and unrelenting. The garden gasped as the cut turned Roy's face into a crimson mask. Yet Roy refused to step back. Even nearly blinded, even battered by volume, he fired back with desperation and pride, landing clean right hands that snapped Calzaghe's head but couldn't slow the Welshman's march. Joe saw the blood, studied it, then went back to work, increasing the tempo, throwing combinations that blurred together in a relentless wave. Still Roy fought, his legs shaky, his vision compromised, but his heart unbreakable. His corner struggled between rounds, unable to fully control the bleeding, unable to restore the Roy Jones Jr., who once looked untouchable. Yet Roy kept coming, refusing to quit, refusing to surrender. Calzaghe, sensing he was taking over, showboated again, dancing, slipping, throwing punches from impossible angles. It was disrespectful, it was bold, it was risky, and yet it was undeniably effective. Still, every time Joe opened up, Roy swung for the fences, trying to land that one final shot that could change everything. The blood kept flowing, the pace kept rising, and the fight transformed into something more than a contest. It became a testament to grit, survival, and the warrior spirit of aging greatness. Calzaghe was winning the rounds, Roy was winning hearts, and together they were crafting a battle that would be remembered not for brutality, but for courage under fire. As the championship rounds approached their end, Calzaghe continued to dominate the tempo, walking Roy down with hands lowered, daring him to throw, daring him to prove there was still magic left in his gloves. And Roy did whenever he found a window. He fired counters with the same elegance he once used to mesmerize the world. But age is a merciless opponent. His movement slowed, his reactions dulled. His combinations came in singles instead of bursts. Calzaghe, meanwhile, fought like a man chasing the final stroke on his legacy canvas, determined to beat another legend to affirm his place among the greats. The 12th round arrived, and the audience rose as if sensing the moment's weight. Both fighters met in the center, trading, pushing, giving the crowd every last ounce of heart they had left. Roy swung a final home run punch, a last spark of the genius that once ruled the sport. Calzaghe answered with a flurry, sealing his dominance, sealing the story the scorecards would soon confirm. The bell rang. The war was over. Roy walked back to his corner slow, bloodied but proud, knowing he had given everything, knowing he had stood against a younger, fresher man and refused to fold. Calzaghe stood tall, knowing he had climbed from a first-round knockdown to deliver a masterclass of heart, pressure, and precision. As Michael Buffer returned to center ring, the arena fell into an expectant hush. The judges' scores were read. Unanimous. The winner, Joe Calzaghe. The crowd erupted, honoring both men. One, an undefeated champion. The other, a fading legend who had shown the courage of a lion. Calzaghe raised his hands. Roy nodded in respect. And as they embraced, the echoes of their battle settled into boxing history, a night where legacy met legacy. And both men walked away having given the world something unforgettable.